Hello and welcome back to the Comic Books Matter podcast. I am your host, Jesse, and with me today is another brilliant guest. He's an editor, host, and punching bag of uppercut crit. He's the snake with a little bit more cake. And the man with the second hottest Final Fantasy takes, Andrew Cogswell.
Hello. hello. That was very good. That was
Thanks,
very,
Andrew.
very.
I always struggle with some of the guests' intros because you like with Ty and like Monty and even Jess to an extent, they put all their like real big memes in their profiles.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And yours is like straight professional, and I'm like, what is Andrew?
I mean,
like?
except for the first line being "future corpse," but I mean, yeah. Other than that, yeah, that's there. It's all in there.
Yeah. So. I like the man with the second hottest Final Fantasy takes because I feel like everybody in the chat has like the number one spot that they're just fighting for.
See, here's my Final Fantasy take. 15's bad, and the 13 series is, it is what it is, and 6 is weird and weirdly paced, and like that's the extent, you know. But yeah.
Well, Andrew, thank you for coming on today. And I know we threw a few topics around, but I know you were really excited for Why the Last Man, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to exactly jump into it, but let's start with your kind of origin of how you got into comics, and then let's like slowly push into why.
Okay. So I'm a huge Coheed and Cambria fan.
Okay, I like where this is starting already.
Yeah, I figured you would. And so when Coheed's third album came out, Go to Apollo, I'm Burning Star 4, Volume 1 from Fear Through the Eyes of Madness, they released a comic book accompaniment with it because all their stuff, with the exception of one album that hadn't come out yet at this point, is concept based, and the singer Claudio Sanchez was writing comic books to kind of go along with it, and it was a very dark book, and the art was incredible, and I wanted it so bad. But I was like in high school, I was poor as hell. I wasn't able to work yet. I was like 14, and my girlfriend at the time and I were walking around a mall, and we found it, and she's like, "I'm buying this for you. You've wanted it for so long." So that was my first comic book I ever owned. And I still have it. It's actually a collector's piece now. It's very hard to find.
Did you read comic books before that, or you're like, "Oh,
no.
My favorite band has a comic book. I'm going buying comics."
That one. No, I had never read comic books before because so my big thing keeping me from comic books there is kind of two things. One, growing up very poor, and comics are expensive, and two, to me as a kid and before really the Coheed comic, I had always thought of comic books as superheroes. Like that's just what they were. There was nothing outside of that.
Yeah.
And to me, superhero continuity was really intimidating. Because I mean, at that point, Spider-Man probably would have been around issue 550 or so, maybe a little bit earlier, 500. X-Men was wherever X-Men was at, the mid 2000s. And so like it's just really intimidating because like I'm one of those people, because I have a broken brain, where I'm like, I want to know as much as humanly possible before I start reading something, if I'm gonna jump in the midway. And that's why like Metal Gear Solid to me is like such a cool series, because there's so much lore packed into like 7 games. And like I just eat lore up when I'm interested in the lore. So for me, superhero comic books were always intimidating because I was interested in the lore, but there was just so much.
Yeah,
and like the interconnectivity and just like the like event issue like series like Secret Invasion and stuff like that was just so much. So yeah, I never read comics growing up, and that was my first one.
So starting from the Coheed book, like did you just consume that and you're like, oh, this could be something else, and then you like sought out more, or did you just get that and you were good for a little bit?
I was good for a little bit. I was really big into music at the time. I was playing in a band. We were recording. We were playing shows, and I was in early high school. So I was busy. I mean, like I had a serious girlfriend at the time. So yeah, I was busy. Like, to me, comics, like, this was a one-off thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then 2009 rolls around and everyone is talking about this movie that's about to come out called Watchmen.
Okay.
And I had never heard of Watchmen before, but it was being flagged as like, hey, this is one of the greatest comic books of all time. Like, it was on the New York Times bestseller. It's one of Time's like most 50 most important or 100 most important books you need to read, whatever. And the movie was coming out. And a lot of my friends had started reading it because of that, because they wanted to read it before the movie came out. And the movie came out beginning of May of 2009. My birthday is beginning of April. So for my birthday, my girlfriend at the time, my now wife, before we were even dating, got me my first copy of Watchmen. So my first two comic books were not bought by me; they were bought by girlfriends, or a girlfriend and a friend at the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I read Watchmen, and I was like, "This is really cool." It's superheroes, but it's self-contained. And that was kind of the beginning to me of like the superhero or the comic book movie, because like we had Spider-Man and stuff before that, but like this was the first one that I felt like was like the comic book was accessible in a way,
Sure.
because once again it was self-contained. Because I had seen like X-Men. I remember seeing X-Men for like my birthday one year. I remember seeing the first Spider-Man for my birthday with a couple of friends when I was like 11. So like I had seen them before, but this was the first one where I was like, people are reading these books. People are wanting to get involved in this medium. So yeah, and then I took another couple of years off, and then in college I was playing D&D every week one summer at the place called the Fantasy Shop in St. Louis where I was living, and they had a comic section, and I asked the clerk, I'm like, hey, I don't want superhero stuff. I want something kind of dark and like horror based. He's like, all right, cool. Check this out. And he handed me Scott Snyder's American Vampire. And it took off from there. I kept up with American Vampire. I started getting into superheroes because of friends like helping me, like showing me what I need to learn. I started working at a comic book store. Yeah, so it kind of just took off from there.
I mean, not to say I know everything about you, but I never knew that you dabbled into working at a comic book store.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a comic book store in the fact that we sold comic books in like trades, but it was a place called Hastings. It no longer exists. It closed shortly after I was fired from there, a couple years after. But they sold books, movies, CDs, comics, and video games. It was like I always described it as if like Spencer's and Barnes and Noble had a baby, and Blockbuster and GameStop had a baby, and then those two babies had a baby.
And that's why it failed.
Well, I mean, yeah, that and just like, yeah, there was a lot of reasons why I failed. But I mean, like, it was a great store. It was really cool, especially because like being in the middle of small town Missouri, like that was the only place to get comics and games that wasn't like Walmart. In fact, I found a lot of pretty rare issues digging through their backlog. Like I found a copy of Spider-Man 700 where Peter Parker dies and Otto takes over for the superhero Spider-Man run. Like I have a variant copy of that that's worth at least $100 because just they had ordered it and nobody bought it because it was a small town that didn't care about comic books. Like I have a few of those where like I got super lucky with some rare books. So
I mean, yeah, that's honestly one of my biggest joys of like digging through like thrift stores or like antiques. Or, like we just have comics. Buy 5 for $1. I'm like, you guys don't know what might be in here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think between my floppy issues and my trades, I think I have a close to 200 concurrent issues of Spider-Man, like 200 straight issues. And that's including going through all of Superior Spider-Man and back into Amazing when they restarted that when Peter came back. So
I think my closest something like that is either Teen Titans or Batman. I think I'm pretty close to a really long run of that. But through that, how did you get to Y the Last Man?
I got to Y the Last Man because God, I'm trying to remember. So I was exploring Vertigo stuff because it's Vertigo, right? It's been
Yeah,
a
please
while.
do.
Yeah, I'm looking at the book right now. Yeah, it's Vertigo. I was looking into Vertigo stuff, and because like I was coming off of finishing American Vampire, um, and I was like, I want more stuff like that. And it was at a point in time where like I'm realizing now that the media I consume all is like very like into each other, like they connect really well. So My Chemical Romance's Danger Days, The True Life of the Fabulous Killjoys album had just come out. I had just started getting into stuff like 28 Days Later and not It Follows. I will never watch that movie. I can't remember the other but like all this post-apocalyptic stuff.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Um
see what would be related to 28 Days Later.
it was like a movie from the 80s where people put on their sunglasses and they see like the
Oh,
true.
They Live.
Yeah, They Live. There it is.
Yeah.
It's similar to They Follow or It Follows.
I mean,
It's
yeah,
just two little words. That's why I
They
was.
Live has that 5-minute fight scene between Roddy Piper and Keith David.
Yeah, yeah. So I was watching stuff like that. I was getting really into post-apocalyptic stuff. I was writing my own post-apocalyptic short story for a creative writing class in college, and I was looking up good post-apocalyptic comic books, and obviously Walking Dead was on there. I was like, don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I had read the first trade, and I was like, that was cool. I'm done. I don't vibe with zombies that much, and didn't. It just wasn't my thing. And then Why the Last Man was on there, and that would start. Once again, I was in college, so I was poor, so that was me. Like, I was adding comic books to my Christmas list. And Barnes and Noble runs this great deal around Christmas time: buy two get one free.
Yeah.
So my mother-in-law, being rad as hell, bought me the first 3 hardback like deluxe editions.
Oh wow! Like just off the bat.
Well, yeah, for Christmas, yeah. So I had I right away had like 3 huge books to read, and I ended up saving money throughout college and like working a little bit extra to buy the last 2 hardback volumes. I wanted to get them before they stopped printing them and went to trades.
Yeah.
So I have all 5 deluxe edition books.
Wow.
Yeah, which I love. But yeah, that's how I found Why the Last Man, is just from wanting to consume more post-apocalyptic content and just Googling good post-apocalyptic books or comic books.
So
Yeah.
the moving on to into the Why Last Man, you brought it. That was the first thing you wanted to talk about, and so
Yeah.
to me, it makes you feel like that there's a lot more to how that story touched you than anything else in that time. I mean, I'm not sure. Like, I know My Chemical Romance is a different story, but like the idea that the post-apocalyptic story itself could just carry along with you the whole time. Because for me, anything post-apocalyptic tends to just kind of be like, "Oh, that was cool," and I move along. I never really get attached to anything like that because kind of we're living in it all the time.
Yeah.
So what exactly about Why the Last Man? Like, what about it still carries with you, and why did you like jump into it? I guess we probably should explain what Why the Last Man is first.
Yeah, probably.
Everyone's like, what is the book?
Yeah. So Why the Last Man is the story of a young man in New York named Yorick Brown who is the last man on Earth. Because something happens that you learn what happens throughout the course of the series that kills off every mammal with a Y chromosome except for Yorick and his pet monkey Ampersand. And it's Yorick's journey to do a couple things. 1, to figure out what happened, and 2, to find his girlfriend / fiance that he proposed to as the apocalypse hit. Like literally the second he asked her to marry him. This happens in like the first issue. I'm not spoiling anything, dear listener. As soon as he asked that question, like the phone line dies because the apocalypse hits and all the men are killed. And like it does this really cool thing at the beginning. I think the first issue where like it lists off stats. It's like 90% of the world leaders are dead. There's 13 people in the House, because this is like set in 2002. 13 people in the House of Representatives, and like 25 in the Senate, or in Congress or whatever. I always get these mixed up. Because everyone else, all the other ones are dudes. Like out of the top Fortune 500 companies, 495 of the CEOs are dead. And like it goes through this very, very like eye-opening like stat page of like, hey, the world went to hell in a handbasket because all the dudes died. And York is not a successful man. Like he's an amateur escape artist / magician, who's struggling to find work because he got an English degree like me, who also struggled to find work for a very long time. So
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
And like I've only read the first deluxe hardback. I never got further just because I didn't have the money to buy it because it was also a gift from me when I got it.
Fair.
And I have a bad habit of just buying the first hardcover or trade paperback and just forgetting to buy the rest.
Yeah.
But the idea too with York is like he's not like the best person either. I mean, like not like he's like a scumbag, but he's also when you usually have post-apocalyptic characters, they're either one of two categories. They're just the worst of the worst, or they're kind of like superhuman in a way about how they like handle things.
Yeah.
And York is very much like the middleman of both of those fields.
Yeah. So York is an everyman, 100%. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
And the superhuman that role is kind of taken by a character named Agent 355, who is a member of the Culper Ring, which is the president's like elite secret service, who is charged with escorting Yorick to find the doctor who could potentially figure out what's going on with him and why he's still alive, and also eventually to his fiancee Beth. And their relationship is really great throughout the book because they start out absolutely hating each other, and like they butt heads regularly, but you can tell like as you read through the book, like their relationship develops and like they become friends. And like it feels earnest and real, which is nice because a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff can feel forced as far as character development and like interactions and how relationships develop. But Brian K. Vaughan, who wrote the series and is actually my favorite comic writer, does an excellent job of like developing relationships in the book. Not just between 355 and York, but also between York and Dr. Mann, York and his sister Hero, York and his girlfriend, fiance Beth, like all these characters, and how they all interweave with each other is really great.
And so with White Last Man, like there's a lot of themes of, at least again, this is just for my memory, the themes of like survivor's guilt, struggling with like a massive responsibility that you are just unprepared for. And then at the same time, on like the opposite side of that, people who are alive of, well, now we're here. What do we do with this?
Yeah, I remember when I was reading the books for the first time, I was flying home from California back to Missouri, and I had gotten the books for Christmas. I had already finished book 1, so I was on book 3, I think. No, book 2. Because I just reread the arc I want to talk about right before we record. I was reading an arc on the plane, and the arc is called Safe Word. It's issues 18 and 20 in book 2. And I don't want to get too into it because you haven't read it yet, but it deals with survivor's guilt and York being forced to confront his depression and his recklessness in a way that as a 21 year old had who hadn't admitted that they were depressed or gotten help resonated with me. Like I remember reading that on the plane home, and one, it's very graphic, so like trying to, I'm reading on the plane, I'm trying to like lean towards the planes,
Yeah.
like the window, so I'm like nobody else can see what I'm reading because it's very graphic. It resonated with me, and it was the first time. So that's issues 18, 19, 20. I mean, in a 60 issue series, that was the first time I was like, oh wow, like this is dealing with something. This is going somewhere and going deep into it in a way I wasn't expecting. Rereading it now, 7, 8 years later, it doesn't hit me as hard. Despite me having forgot kind of what had happened, I reread it just so I could talk about it. But I still think it does a good job. I just don't think I'm as impressed with it as I was then, and I think that's just part of it, me just being older and like in a different state of mind.
And like media as a whole has kind of expanded in a way where it's like, there's plenty of things that handle things really poorly, but I think there's a gravitas to
Yeah.
media now that just it wasn't really there in the mid early 2000s.
And that's something I want to bring up really quick because I feel like I'd be remiss not to mention it. When I first read the series, I was not as aware of social justice issues and societal issues as I am now, and like perspective and stuff like that. I'd be remiss to say that these books do not handle transgender issues super well. In the one part I read that dealt with that, and also there's some harsh language in regards to homosexuality, not in like a disparaging way, but just like slurs that are not great. I don't think they're used with malice or intent by the author, but it is jarring looking back and being like, oh wow, I completely missed this the first time because I just didn't think about it.
I mean, it's the same. It's the same issue right now with they're having with Sandman because they're trying to adapt it to Netflix, and there's a lot of things in Sandman because Sandman was written in the 90s, like just things that are just different overall. Like the it's weird saying things are different because they really should be they should have been what they are now in a lot of ways. But just progression is progression. And the idea is people are like, oh man, they're trying to cancel Sandman. Where Neil Gaiman himself is like, I'm trying to update it to the 21st century or the 21st century and try to make sure I fix the mistakes I made in the past because you learn and not let the artist go back and change it every once in a while, especially if they're readapting, not like going back and just editing the text. But since they're readapting it, the idea of letting it be exactly the same always sits wrong with me, but at the same time, changing the original text also feels wrong. Like there has to be a balance with that. And I feel like as long as you can go back to something you love and see, hey, these are wrong now. You can find the enjoyment still from the thing you loved as acknowledging its flaws.
100%. I completely agree. It was shocking to me rereading some sections and being like, oh wow. And like I said, I don't think it was ever done with ill intent by Vaughn at all. I don't think it was intentionally transphobic or homophobic. I just think that it wasn't as well thought out as it would have been now. You know? And that's just ignorance. I would assume, because of the times, and like that's obviously not. I mean, we have to look back at media as a product of its time, within reason. Like there's obviously some things that are just unacceptable. 100%. But
I think we both can agree too. Like no matter who your favorite creator is or artist is in any way, they're going to fail you at some point. Either you going back and looking at what they made that you loved, or just in the future. At some point, those artists will fail just because they're human. And also, everybody has their own way of progressing, and sometimes you progress past the things you love.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would say everyone will. I'd like to. I hold out hope that there are people and creators that won't. But I'm not surprised when they do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I have
I
the
I think that's a healthier way to look
like
at it.
yeah, the only reason I push the idea that everybody will at some point is so when that happens, it doesn't become either a blame game or of a life ruining thing in a lot of ways. Because I feel like, especially for myself, maybe this is just probably from my personal experiences with these things, where it's like, oh, this person, I built my whole entire like idea of like good things for the world, and either they're terrible or I went back and like, oh, these things are actually really, really bad in a lot of ways, and it's always a dangerous balance.
It is. I mean, it's hard because like, I mean, we could talk about this for forever, but like one of my favorite bands was I have very, very bad conflicting emotions about it, is Brand New, and the things Jesse Lacey has been accused of doing, and they are fucking horrible. It's a whole thing. It's very hard to listen to their music now, but their music will always mean something to me. And it's easier to go back and listen to the songs now, some of the songs now, and be like, oh, this does not sit right with me anymore. But yeah. But yeah, I felt like with Why the Last Man in particular, like I need to the last thing I would want to do is like just brush over that and say like, hey, like everything's perfect. This is a great book. But I still think it's a fantastic read. It introduced me to Brian K. Vaughan, who, along with Saga, are two of my favorite books, if not my two favorite books. With American Vampire being up there as well.
And the nice thing about K. Vaughan, like even if you don't like the idea of a post-apocalyptic story, is he writes like every genre at some point.
Oh yeah, like, for sure. I mean, saga sci-fi, yeah,
sci-fi like sci-fi. Yeah, he's written basically Stranger Things, but what if it was great and all women?
Yeah, I forgot he did Paper Girls. Like, yeah. Oh, I think I lost you.
Baghdad, I believe. No, Lion to Baghdad.
Pride of Baghdad.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Pride of Baghdad. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like he's all over the place. So even if Why the Last Man isn't your taste, I think he's a good author to find something in his bibliography and like jump into.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think he tackles things for the most part very well. And he's one of the few comic book writers that if he's got something coming out, I'll at least like take a passing glance at it just because of the name attached to it. I know a lot of people that way with Jeff Johns. I like Jeff Johns enough, but there's some stuff that like I'm not as into like the superhero thing.
Yeah, for sure.
As I used to be. Because for a while I really was, and I just after DC Rebirth, I just fell off real hard. I tried keeping up with everything, and I just couldn't, and I just.
But like me for the independent market, I'm always jumping on whatever Lemire's doing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, he's my favorite Canadian, I guess. But like, I look at my shelf and I'm like, oh yeah, I got this one and this one and this one and this one.
Yeah, I'm a big Faction fan too. Sex Criminals is great. Yeah,
and even within Fraction, you got like the family of Fraction, which you got Kelly Sue doing her independent stuff. You have Chip doing his. He has like a horror book coming out soon that looks really weird.
Nice.
So yeah, like the independent market is like people like to say the independent market's dying in weird ways. I don't know why, but there's so many things for you to find, and what's really wild is like it's shifted from being just only adult books to being a good mix of young adult books within it.
For sure.
So like now it's really just a playing field for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing is like people have been saying the comic book industry is dying in various forms for decades. And yeah, to some extent it is. I mean, it's not doing as well as it was at one point. I mean, the Avengers and MCU kind of helped bolster that a little bit, and then it went back down again. But I mean, people are always going to say like, "Oh, this part of the industry is dying," or "This whole industry is dying," and it's like you gotta like there will always, for the most part, there will always be a market for it. You know what I mean? Will things change and will things start going digital? Maybe. Will stuff like the independent market be kind of forced to go digital because printing costs get too high to make back money on it? Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of things at play, but I mean, people have been like doomsday talking the industry for a really long time. So it is what it is.
Yeah. So back to Why the Last Man though.
Yeah.
What I mean, the show should be just called Tangents. But what about you think why? Because I know you said you went back to it and it didn't impact you as hard, but it's like you went back to it. That's the thing. Like,
Yeah.
I have a big enough collection that I can't go back to everything.
Yeah.
But there are books that I keep going back to like yearly. And why is Why one of those books that sticks with you so hard?
So for a couple of reasons. One, I think it tells a really great self-contained story. I think it was really important for the time that I discovered it, like in my life. I was also the first person that, like, out of my friend group that.
Andrew.
Oh, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. I'll go back a little bit because I don't know where it cut off. But for me, like, Why the Last Man was important in the time of my life when I discovered it. And I think it tells us a really great self-contained story. And in my friend group that reads comics, I was the only one that was really pushing it.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I know I hate claiming ownership over proper or like creative works and stuff like that, but like it felt like mine, you know, like I was the one that was like, read this, it's so good. And like I got Jess to read it, she loved it. I got a few other friends to read it because a lot of my friends don't read comics. But I even got one friend that doesn't read comics to read it and to buy the whole series. I mean, he bought the trades, so it was a little bit cheaper for him than it was for me. But yeah, he doesn't really read comics and he enjoyed it. And excuse me.
That's okay.
Really liked it. So for me, like the series that were formative, like I kind of talked about earlier, for my comic book like life, were American Vampire, then Why the Last Man, then Saga. Because I was also a very early adopter of Saga, which is another Brian K. Vaughan book. So like those are like my big three. As far as like pillars of my comic book history. Despite what I talked about with Watchmen and the Coheed book, like those will be my three series always.
And do you feel like Why or even those other two series have influenced the media you consume now in any way?
Yes and no. So I don't like horror all that much. I like the idea of horror. I just don't like consuming it. So when I wanted to do American Vampire, I was looking I was 18, 19. I was looking for something a little bit more mature and grown up that wasn't, like I said, superhero-y. So I liked American Vampire for that reason. And that got me turned on to Scott Snyder in general, which then led to me loving his Batman run and collecting almost I think I have just about every single issue from that run, except for maybe the first 6 issues, which sucks.
I'm luckily I have the very first issue.
What's funny is I was working at the comic book store when the first issue launched. I didn't pick it up because I wasn't collecting single issues at the time. I was strictly a trade paperback person.
It was when we like I wasn't working. I was still very young. Or maybe I wasn't. It was like right before I graduated.
Okay.
And my dad's job was not as profitable as it was before, so we didn't pick up comics like we used to.
Yeah.
And so the one week he's like, let's just go pick up some new books. It was literally the launch week of the New 52. So I got like 2 or 3 of the ultra rare number ones just because I was
Yeah.
there when they were on the shelf.
Yep. What's funny is like I saw Batman number 1. It was on the shelf for weeks because once again, like this was a small store. But they also had like an online portal where you buy stuff. And if a store near you didn't have it, they would ship it. Oh, excuse me, I don't know why I'm yawning so much. They would ship it. So it didn't stay very long. But it was there for a few weeks. I could have grabbed it, but I never did.
I think that my first printing of Killing Joke are like my 2 prizes.
Oh, you have a first printing of Killing Joke. Interesting.
Yeah, I found that in an antique shop, and I'm like, "Is this a first printing?" And then I like double check copyrights and color of the cover, and I'm like, "Yeah, this is."
Damn, that's really cool. But yeah, so American Vampire led me down Snyder's run, and then Why Last Man got me into Brian K. Vaughan, which got me into Saga. I don't know if it impacts the media I consume because my brain jumps from things I enjoy to things I enjoy. I think Saga is a better story than Star Wars. But I'm also like the resident Star Wars hater. I don't hate Star Wars. I just don't care for it as much as everyone else. At Uppercut.
I appreciate that Uppercut, but in general, the community of Uppercut, if you just are like blasé about something, you're the hater of the thing.
Yeah.
Unless you're a staunch hater like Glenn is about Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I will fight Glenn to the death. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think those have impacted. And this isn't like the fun answer, but I don't think they've impacted the media I consume because well,
I'm curious. Like you talk about how, well, maybe you didn't talk about this, but like the idea of the level of storytelling that especially some of these prestige books give you.
Yeah.
Did you ever see yourself seeking out stories that like at least hit those levels?
I mean, I think they're more of a result of wanting prestige storytelling as opposed to being the cause of me seeking it out. I mean, my favorite video game from the time I was 10 was Final Fantasy 9. Which is, I mean, is it the greatest storytelling in the world? No, I'm not going to lie to you and say it is, but like when most people that age are still playing like Mario 64, which great game, don't get me wrong. But like platformers or GoldenEye or whatever, like I'm sitting here reading or playing a game that is like a tribute to Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And and I hate saying that because like I don't want to sound hoity-toity and like lift my nose up, but like for video games, I've always been a story person. Like that's been ingrained. Like, yeah, some of my favorite games are like Super Mario World is great. The Crash games, the Spyro games, like yes, I love those games. Like they mean a lot to me. But I love deep, impactful story-based games. So I think when I realized comics could do that, it led me to these 3 series as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think they're a result rather than like the cause. Yeah, because I mean, just deep stories have always been a thing for me. I got an English degree, and at one point I wanted to be a writer, and I was a journalist at one point. Like, storytelling is important. So yeah, I think that's what drew me to them.
And that the last part you talked about just briefly. I don't know how much you still do any like creative writing in any way, but do you feel like you at least are influenced by somewhat of the way these writers create their stories, or do you think that just is like just an amalgam of everything you've enjoyed?
I mean, I think it's amalgam, but I mean, like right now, for some of my old high school buddies, we have game night every Monday night. And when quarantine started, one of them was like, "Hey, we should do a TTRPG." And I am the only one out of the 5. I take that back. I'm the one out of the 5 of us that's been playing TTRPGs the longest. One has literally never played them. The other one has played 1 session, and that was with me in college. And the other 2, I introduced to TTRPGs, and they've since gone off and like found other groups and played with. And so when that was brought up, and we all kind of were like, "Yeah, that'd be fun," I was kind of elected DM, which is fine. I've DM'd before.
Forever DM.
Was that?
So you're becoming a forever DM.
I mean, I have been for years, just because like I've kind of like I taught most of that group how to play. And I've taught, I mean, Jess and I first played together. We taught her little sisters. I taught other friends in college, stuff like that. But I wanted to kind of do something gross and fun and like horror based. And so like visualizing stuff from like American Vampire and even Witches, which is another Scott Snyder horror comic with Jock. Yeah, I mean that definitely inspires it. And yeah, I just like wanting to craft well constructed stories and, you know, characters. I mean, that takes a lot of work, especially when you're doing a lot of improv with
For sure.
4 other people in my case. But yeah, I mean, like the themes, I mean, the first but the first like arc they just did, like we just wrapped up, was they killed a vampire. And so yeah, I mean, there's definitely some American Vampire in there to an extent. Like I said, a lot of like my mental images of vampires and horror, because I'm not a horror person, comes from American Vampire and Witches.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say there's some there. I mean, it definitely is an amalgam of stuff, though. I mean, like stuff like the Adventure Zone, the first campaign they did, Balance, like completely turned storytelling on its head for me, especially D&D storytelling.
Yeah.
So like stuff like that is pulled in any writing I do. Yeah, I mean, it's important to take influences where you can get them. And for me, like I wrote, so to kind of tie this into Why the Last Man, my senior thesis for my college program, for my bachelor's, was to talk about adaptation in any medium and do present a project on adaptation. And so I wrote the first episode of a Why the Last Man show. Like I wrote the pilot episode.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing. I wrote out director's notes and like camera angles and lighting as much as I knew how to do. And I presented that at a panel, and actually had a not a screenwriter, a TV writer for, God, I don't remember what show, but she was in the panel, or she was in the audience, and I had met her earlier that day at a lunch with a teacher or a professor that I had, and she said what she did. I was like, hey, I'm doing a presentation on this later if you want to come. And she came by, and like I talked to her afterwards, and she's like, that was awesome. Like, I've never heard of this. Like, I'm interested in this. Because yeah, I wrote out script, like a 30-page, 40-page script, for my senior thesis project on Why the Last Man.
And now Andrew's the showrunner for the FX show.
Dude, no, I don't wish. That sounds like a lot of stress that I am not qualified to handle.
They seem like they're having a hard time with that show.
What's that?
They seem like they're having a hard time with that show.
Yeah, I'm confident it's never going to happen. They say it is, but I'm very confident it's never going to happen, especially with the pandemic.
Yeah, but yeah, that's just going to break a lot of things that were in production.
Yeah.
Moving on from a Why Last Man to just some questions that I came up with. How do you think comics challenge you or readers in general versus like other mediums?
I think so. Like as a person who's interested in like the art of storytelling, I think it challenges me in maybe a different way, in that like the way, especially single issue comics, if you're reading them the issue to issue as opposed to in collections, the way things are paced has to be so perfect. And so for me, as I'm, especially like I said, when I'm reading single issues, because it's harder to kind of notice when you're reading trades, because it's like binging a show. When I'm reading issue to issue, I really savor the last couple pages and the first few pages because of how they have to push you and engage you to pick up the next issue, but also, 2 weeks, a month later, those first couple pages need to ignite that spark of this is what was going on.
Yeah.
And especially for somebody with memory issues, like, to me, that's a huge thing. So.
And I don't know if you agree with this too, because I know you enjoy film a lot.
Yeah.
And I think about comics in some ways as a film, but a film that's stagnant or stationary. Yeah. And the idea is to create the action with stationary or static pages is really fascinating because for the most part, unless it's like a really big graphic novel, it's like an episode of a TV show or a short film. And sometimes that gets really pulled off really well. It feels like, oh yeah, this just feels like a mini movie that I'm flipping through.
Yeah. I think that has to do with like the collaboration between artist and writer.
Yeah.
Like when you find two that are so in sync with each other, it's on another level. But when you have two people who just do not work well together, and not even talking about like personally, just like their final product does not mesh well, it's very apparent. And there's definitely levels of quality there. And it's not even like their work is bad. It's just they don't fit together.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Next question is, are you the Star-Lord of Uppercut or more of the Thor of Uppercut?
That's a very good question. I don't think I'm the Star-Lord. Wait, hold on. Crap. I might be. I'm strictly talking MCU here because I'm more familiar with them.
Talking MCU. We're not talking
okay. I think I'm a good amalgam of the two.
Yeah.
Because I don't take anything seriously. Like Star-Lord. But I'm also competent when I want to be like Thor.
I was gonna throw an Iron Man, and I decided that Kayla was definitely the Iron Man.
Yeah, that's definitely not me. No, it couldn't be me.
Is there a writer and artist that you would just love to sit down and talk with, just about the creative process or like the idea process with?
Yeah, 100%. And it counts because they've technically written a comic book. Griffin McElroy.
Okay, yeah, I guess, yeah, for sure, I can see that. He's been a few now at this point.
This the third one just came out last week.
Yeah, and they got that Marvel one too, where they all wrote it.
They did, yeah. Journey into Mystery. That was mostly their dad, I think, that headed that up. But like I mentioned, the Adventure Zone earlier, specifically the Balance arc. Like the Balance arc is one of my favorite pieces of fiction of all time.
It's very good.
It is incredible. To the point where like I'm getting a Balance tattoo as soon as this pandemic is over.
There's one arc I don't like, and that's the reason I have to say it's very, very good.
Which one?
I do not like the Suffering. Is the Suffering Game? Is that the name?
The Suffering Game.
Yeah, I don't like the Suffering Game.
Interesting, because that's not my least favorite one. It's not my favorite one, but it's not my least favorite. My least favorite is Crystal Kingdom.
Crystal Kingdom, I think, was the first. I guess the first arc where I'm like, oh, he's really trying to do something here.
Yeah, and I think that it was just jarring. And it was also like I binged that show.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so by the time I had gotten to Crystal Kingdom, I was like, oh god, I'm getting very tired of this. And that was right when that turn started to happen of, oh, this is leading to something. And I think it was very hard for me to care that it was leaning towards something when I was getting burnt out on it. But like I took a couple of weeks off and I was reignited, and yeah.
Yes, Suffering Him. I know it was kind of the point, but his idea of like, oh, let's just put my brothers and my father through a hell was just kind of exhausting in a lot of ways. And then after that, it's the Forgotten Century, which is also a little bit exhausting, but less so.
I love the Stolen Century. I love it.
Like it's really good, but like it's so long, and I think the Suffering Game is also very long, that they both kind of like wore me out near the end, but then brought me back at the very, very end.
That's fair. I think the Lunar Interlude gap between Suffering Games and Stolen Century, I think is some of the best examples of pieces falling into place that I've seen in a maybe ever, if not in a very long time.
And with your choice though for Griffin being the person you want to talk to, it kind of fits into the next question.
Okay,
because it's happening more and more, especially with like more recent announcements. How do you feel about celebrities writing comics? Now there's kind of like two ways to think about this. You have like the J.J. Abrams route where it seems like it's just nepotism.
Yeah,
well,
100%.
him being his son to write Spider-Man. Versus kind of the Keanu Reeves route where he's like, well, I have this character that I want. And I like, is there any time where it doesn't feel kind of weird?
No, not to me, because like especially because like I'm fairly far removed from like the day-to-day comic book industry stuff. It's gonna happen whether I care or not, which is kind of a defeatist look at it, I guess. And if I'm not interested, I'm not interested in it. You know, like I used to follow Spider-Man for a while, for a couple of years, and if they were like, all right, Dan Slott's leaving because I was the last writer I read,
and
Slott's,
Nick Spencer's coming on.
Well, if it was like, and then we're gonna have Nicolas Cage right afterwards, I'd be like, what? Like, this sucks.
I would be curious to see what Nicolas Cage Spider-Man's like.
Yeah, like, I mean, and that's the thing too, is like, it could be good. Who am I to say that they can't write a comic book just because they're already famous? You know what I mean? That said, the J.J. Abrams shit is very nepotism. Very much.
The idea that it's him and his son, you're like, no, you got your son the chance to write Spider-Man.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I was thinking about like, this is the weirdest one. Taboo from Black Eyed Peas.
Did he write one?
He got a mini series of Werewolf by Night by Marvel recently.
I mean, you know what? More power to him. I mean, like, if I were to be mad about that, we would have never gotten Umbrella Academy.
Fair.
We would have never gotten Polarity. We would never have gotten Worst X-Men ever.
Gotten a pretty decent Moon Knight run.
I never read his Moon Knight run. But yeah, I mean, like, I can't be mad about that because like those things were great books, and yeah, I mean, those wouldn't exist if I was anti-celebrity authors.
Well, that's all the questions I had written. Andrew, where could people find your content, or like where can they reach you on social media?
I'm on social media at Cogsthewell, COGSTHEWELL. You can also find me over at Uppercut, at Uppercut Crit, on twitch.tv/Uppercut Crit and uppercutcrit.com, where I am the token white boy. I am also the token heterosexual. So yeah, you can find us over there. And it's mostly everyone else doing work and me just causing trouble.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you are the troublemaker of the group.
Okay, it's forced upon me. All right. I don't know if you saw the Uppercut out of context today.
I
on
did.
Patreon.
I did.
That's the kind of shit I deal with constantly. I'm not going to spoil it because it's for patrons.
Very funny.
But I deal with that all the time. Kayla even said that she's going to stop bullying me for a week because she feels bad.
I mean, sometimes the white straight guy needs to feel like the minority in the group.
Oh, it's every day.
And I want to thank you all for listening to this episode. In the description, you can find links to Uppercut and their merch, because I know they're still. You guys are still doing the charity merch, right?
We are not. That ended in July or June.
Okay, I wasn't sure because last time I talked to Jess was like, yeah, maybe, because I can't get it down.
Oh yeah, I forgot we can't pull anything down.
Yeah, so
that's right.
I don't know if you guys are you still donating it to charity at all, or
I don't think we've talked about it because we were planning on being able to pull it down. And I don't think we've made a decision beyond that.
The links will still be in the description if you want to check out the merch, because the merch is still cool.
Yeah, because Store Envy's like, hey, COVID's a thing, so you can't change anything right now.
Which is weird.
Yeah.
It's like, you guys, like, if we take it down, you don't have to make it.
Yeah.
You can also find links to like situations that are going on